Everyone loves a good serial killer story. And while there are some serial killers whose names have become synonymous with their crimes, like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, there are others who, despite being responsible for just as many, if not more, killings haven't had the same notoriety thrust upon them. These lesser-known serial killers are often forgotten by the public, only to be remembered in small circles of true crime enthusiasts. One such individual is Gary Ridgway, a seemingly ordinary man from Seattle who committed truly heinous acts that earned him the moniker the Green River Killer. Hey, everyone! Today I will be taking you through the disturbing life of Gary Ridgway, a man whose chilling actions shocked a nation. As always, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe before you leave. It really helps us out. Also, Gary Ridgway's victims were primarily sex workers. So this video contains sensitive content, including mentions of violence against women. Viewer discretion is advised. Gary Leon Ridgway was born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in an abusive household, and his father would frequently beat both him and his mother. Because of this, Gary developed a deep resentment towards men. Especially as he got older, his hatred towards men increased, and he began to harbor feelings of inadequacy, shame, and inferiority. These feelings led to Gary being a social outcast throughout school. He found solace only in athletics, where he excelled in baseball and football. At the age of 16, Gary dropped out of high school, citing his inability to control his temper as the reason behind his departure. Despite not having a high school diploma, Gary joined the United States Navy. He served aboard the U.S. Intrepid as an aviation ordnance man until his discharge in 1971. After leaving the Navy, Gary married his girlfriend, but the relationship was far from blissful. His wife would later claim that he had a short fuse and was prone to bouts of extreme violence, allegations supported by several of his other girlfriends. In fact, he would assault two of them so severely that they required hospitalization. Despite his violent tendencies, Gary had a successful career as a truck driver and even received multiple awards for his work. On the surface, it seemed as though he had it all together, a picture of normality he carefully crafted to hide the darkness brewing within. But underneath that facade, Gary was grappling with inner turmoil. The troubled marriage led to a divorce in 1981, which Gary took very hard. Not long after, he moved to a mobile home park in King County, Washington, where he would live out his twisted fantasies. His first victim was a 16-year-old runaway named Wendy Lee Chalk. Gary met her at a bus stop near his house and asked her if she wanted a ride. She agreed, and he brought her to his house under the false pretense of giving her money. He then tied her up, repeatedly raped her, and eventually strangled her to death. Afterwards, he disposed of her body in a nearby park. Although Gary had taken a life, it wasn't until 5 years later that he would strike again. This time, his victim was Cynthia Renee, another young woman who frequented the area where Gary lived. He approached her while she was walking and offered her a ride. She accepted, and Gary drove her to a secluded spot where he beat her over the head with a flashlight before raping her. He then attempted to strangle her, but when she didn't die, he left her there, assuming she would succumb to her injuries. But Cynthia managed to make her way to a nearby gas station where she collapsed. Although she survived, she suffered brain damage due to lack of oxygen and died a few days later. For the next 3 years, Gary evaded the police, but his luck would soon run out. On March 13, 1987, He was arrested for assaulting one of his co-workers at a concrete factory where he worked. While in jail, awaiting his trial for the assault, Gary was linked to the murders of Cynthia and Wendy. He was charged and eventually convicted for the 2 killings, as well as for others that had occurred between 1984 and 1988. All of these women were sex workers, except for one, Maria Knuckles, who was Gary's neighbor. During his trial, Gary's defense attorney tried to portray him as a gentle giant who couldn't hurt a fly, claiming that the charges against him were the result of a police conspiracy. However, DNA evidence proved otherwise. Despite being found guilty, Gary avoided the death penalty due to a legal technicality. He was instead sentenced to 150 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Although Gary was finally behind bars, the nightmare wasn't over yet. There were still many more victims to be accounted for. The case remained cold for nearly 20 years until new technology allowed investigators to revisit the evidence. They discovered a link between Gary and 17 previously unsolved murders, all of which had been committed between 1984 and 1998. Victims were predominantly sex workers who had disappeared from the Seattle area. Their bodies were found dumped in secluded spots in King County, and in most cases, the only evidence of foul play was the presence of ligature marks around their necks, indicating that they had been. With this new evidence, prosecutors charged Gary with another 17 counts of aggravated murder. This time, however, Gary didn't deny his crimes. He pleaded guilty to all 17 counts, admitting to killing a total of 49 women. Gary was given another 270 years in prison without the possibility of release. As Gary's trial and sentencing were highly publicized, more former lovers and colleagues came forward with their own stories of abuse, bringing the total number of Gary's confirmed victims to 93. He became known as the Green River Killer due to the large number of victims whose bodies were found along the Green River. However, it is suspected that his actual victim count may never be known. In addition to the confirmed victims, there are around 120 Jane Does in the King County area whose disappearances remain unsolved. It's possible that Gary was responsible for some of these cases, but due to a lack of evidence, he has not been charged. Throughout Gary's trial, he claimed that his victims were prostitutes who had willingly accompanied him into the woods and that their deaths were accidental. However, autopsies revealed that most of the women had been strangled and many bore signs of sexual assault. Gary's motive for killing, according to him, was but investigators quickly dispelled this theory. Many of the women were killed before prostitution was legalized in the area, and none of them had any criminal records. Furthermore, Gary was known to frequent areas where women gathered, making it unlikely that they would attack him unprovoked. There are also inconsistencies in Gary's story. For example, he claimed that he had no memory of the murders, which investigators believe was a tactic to avoid the death penalty. However, during his trial, he gave conflicting accounts of certain events, which made his defense attorney ask for a mental evaluation. The results of the evaluation concluded that although Gary suffered from depression, he was fit to stand trial and could assist in his own defense. What makes the Green River case even more perplexing is the fact that Gary operated for over 20 years without being caught. He was able to evade law enforcement for so long due to a combination of factors. First, the disposal of bodies in remote locations made it difficult for investigators to connect the crimes. Second, many of the victims were sex workers, a population that was marginalized and often overlooked by law enforcement. Finally, advances in forensic technology were crucial in linking many of the crimes together and ultimately catching Gary. DNA analysis played a significant role in the conviction of Gary Ridgway. In 1988, when Gary was initially arrested, DNA testing was not as readily available as it is today. However, with the advent of new technology, investigators were able to revisit cold cases and use DNA evidence to connect them to Gary. In addition, advancements in forensic science allowed investigators to develop a profile of Gary's likely appearance, which helped generate leads and narrow the search. Without these technological advancements, it's unlikely that Gary would have been caught. The impact of Gary's crimes on the community was profound. Many people in the Seattle area were shocked and horrified to learn the extent of his crimes. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped the community for years were finally lifted when Gary was caught, but the scars of the Green River killings continue to run deep. The families and friends of the victims continue to seek justice and closure for their loved ones, and the case remains a stark reminder of the evil that can lurk beneath a seemingly ordinary exterior. So, what do you think? Is there anything we missed about the Green River Killer? Let us know your thoughts below. That's all for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe before you leave. See you next time!